Should I just leave the meeting now?
Okay. So welcome everyone on our last meeting on Guide to Postgraduate Career in Medicine. This time we're going to Australia, and Helena, the student of Wrocław Medical University, is gonna explain to us how it looks like in Australia, and we're gonna start with her presentation. And if you have any questions, you can ask them like during the presentation in the chat, and then Helena is gonna answer hopefully your questions. So I think we can start without further talking. So Helena, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sweet. So welcome everybody. So I'm just gonna try and give you a quick guide to how you can work in Australia after you graduate. There are a few different options. So you can either go straight from here to Australia and then do your internship year there, or you can specialize here. There's a lot of different options. You can also do a PhD, but I'll get into it all in detail now. So essentially this is what I'm going to be talking about today. Essentially how it all works, the pathways you can take, visas and other formalities. There is a lot of formalities, the different specializations, the PhD and the average wage in Australia. And yeah, that's essentially it. Okay, so in Australia, after graduation, all medical students must undergo 1 year of supervised practice, which is just your intern year. And after that year, you gain general registration, and this has to be 12 months in specific hospitals. And then after that first year, you can apply for specialization only in general medicine and psychiatry, but not all colleges accept only 1 year. Most colleges, you have to have 2 years of internship, but after your first intern year, you then become a resident. So then you have your resident year. And then afterwards, you apply to one of, so the way you apply for specialization is a little bit different to Europe and America, from what I know. You have to apply to a college. So there are 16 different colleges, and I could list them, but it's just, I mean, there's like pediatrics, everything, every kind of major subdivision has its own college. And the 16 colleges also include the dental surgery, which doesn't really apply to medical students, but still, so there's 15. And then you complete in all colleges 2 to 3 years of basic training, and you only have to do around 3 years of specialization if you want to be a general practitioner. And a general practitioner in other countries is also called a family doctor. In Poland, it's called lekarz rodzinny. And then for all the rest of the specializations, you have to complete something called further advanced training. And then this is usually an extra 2 or 3 years. So in total, most specializations are around 5 to 6 years. And yeah, and in the years of training, you are qualified as a senior resident, registrar, and then senior registrar. So there are as an international graduate, there are 3 main pathways you can take to become a doctor in Australia and be able to work there. So we have the Compton Authority pathway, the standard pathway, and the specialist pathway. So the Competent Authority and the specialist pathway are very specific, and you have to have very specific accreditations or have your specialization done in very specific places. This is mostly Canada, the US, and Britain. So for most people, it probably won't apply. So I'll focus mostly on the standard pathway, but I'll go over the other 2 as well. So this is a nice little flow chart to determine which pathway you should take. So for example, given that you are a student at Wrocław Medical University, and straight after university, you want to go work in Australia. So you completed your schooling in a country other than Australia, yes. And then this is the next qualification that you need, and you have to be issued a primary medical qualification, so your diploma, by a training institute listed both by the Australian Medical Council and the World something of Medical Studies. I'm not sure what this acronym stands for. It's not Australian, it's just international. And so Wrocław Medical University is accredited by both. And there's some links at the bottom of my presentation. Hopefully the presentation will be shared with you somewhere, or you can just look at them and copy them into your Finder, and you can check which universities are accredited. But most in Poland, I checked before I came, were, so that's good. So then if you haven't got a specialization, you say no. And then if you want to do your, so if you only want to go to Australia to do your specialization, then you go through a short-term training at a medical specialty pathway, which I'm not going to talk about today because that is very specific and there's even more criteria. And as you'll see, there's a lot of criteria for everything. And then only if you have completed the requirements of an MBA designated competent authority, which is things like the USMLE, and there's a whole list of them. There's only 8 or so, but it's like I said, Canada, US, England, Ireland, New Zealand, and only a few countries have that kind of in their educational curriculum. But if you're just coming out from all the universities in Poland, then you go for the standard pathway. So the Compton Authority pathway is intended, for overseas trained non-specialists, but also it applies for specialists. So if you have completed your specialization, you can go through the Competent Authority pathway. And it's essentially a little bit different because you have to do your board exams rather than the other exam, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. And then you have to apply to the board rather than to the Australian Medical Council and all of the normal pathways. So this is how you would do this. So you would have to first secure an employment offer, which means you already have your internship years done afterwards. And then you have to apply to the Australian Medical Council for primary source verification, then to the MBA for provisional registration. So rather than doing it through the normal way, you do it through the other pathways, like the other exams, and then you have to get 12 months of supervised practice anyway. I'm not sure if that makes much sense, but this is, like I said, not really a pathway that is going to be the option for most people. Then the specialist pathway applies for, I'll just read this out, it will be easier. It applies for applicants in one of the following categories. So overseas trained specialists applying for an assessment of comparability to the standard of a specialized training in that specialty in Australia, which, to translate, means essentially you already have your specialization and then you go to Australia and then you undergo assessment to check if your specialization training is to the same level as those in Australia. Otherwise, there is something called an area of need. So if there is a specific area, for example, general surgery, that would be lacking in Australia. So there's no physicians in Australia that fill the quota and the need for hospitals in Australia to fully function. Then they call in doctors from other countries into an area of need. And so then you'll just immediately be able to go in as a doctor after obviously getting everything checked and work in that area of need. And then overseas trained specialists or specialists in training wishing to undertake a short period of specialized or advanced training in Australia, short-term training. So this, I don't know if you remember in the flowchart from before, this was the pathway on the right here. And so this is essentially, if you're already undergoing a specialist training, it's a little bit of a supplement. So you're going to do part of your training in Australia. And then IMG is International Medical Graduates, just if I didn't clarify that before. And so they have, so this is the same thing repeated again. It's just specialist recognition or area of need. And so this one, as you can see, is a lot more complicated. But you apply, the AMC, once again, is the Australian Medical Council. So you apply on the website, you apply to a college, a specific medical college for assessment. Then you know, complete all the forms. So you have to have supporting documents. You have to have all of your documents translated into English, which isn't very hard. In Australia, like in Poland, you needed, in Europe, you need something called nostrification. And I'm pretty sure in Australia, you just need to have it translated by a verified translator, and that's it. So you don't need to get it through the embassies. You don't need to get it translated through the embassies. That's the main difference, which is really nice because that is so confusing here. But yeah, you need a lot of details in your application, which I won't go in on, but you're welcome to have a read later on. And you also have to pay the fees. There is a lot of fees, and I was going to try and include the fees for the specific applications, but there were so many different specific fees for each one. It's usually between 300 and 1,000 Australian dollars, which is around 900 to 3,000 zloty, or I'd say 200 to 800 euro. So it's quite a lot, and this is just to apply. This isn't anything, and this is just the cost of the application to maybe be accepted. And this obviously excludes visas and any other things that you need. And then once you submit your application to the college, you get an assessment outcome, and that's it. So now moving on to the standard pathway. So this is for international medical graduates seeking general registration with the board, and you need a primary qualification in medicine and surgery. So in medicine and surgery in Australia, there is still a medical degree rather than Doctor of Medicine. It's called the MBBS, which is the Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery. And it's actually in the, I'm sure it's the AQF index, like in the how highly degrees are ranked. It's actually below a Doctor of Medicine, which I'm not sure why it still is working in Australia, and only I think 3 out of the 8 main universities still use it. But it's essentially an undergraduate. It's not like a combined master's, it's just a fully undergraduate degree that lasts 6 years. But that's why this says qualification in medicine and surgery. We obtained that just by having our Doctor of Medicine. And yeah, so it's awarded by a training institution recognized by the AMC. And like I said, most in Australia are recognized. I didn't actually find any that weren't, but I'd say it's just safer to check. And then you have to go through the AMC CAT MCQ examination, the AMC clinical examination, or workplace-based assessment of clinical skills and knowledge by an accredited authority. And then once you have the AMC certificate, then you can apply to the board. So before you even apply to the board, to be able to have general registration, you have to go through the AMC. So the exam here is a computer administered 3.5-hour exam, and it consists of 150 A-type MCQ, so multiple choice questions. So it's what a correct response from 5 options, and it focuses on essential medical knowledge involving understanding of disease processes, clinical examination, diagnosis and investigation, therapy and management. You have to essentially get 150 correct out of 150. Yeah. So you have to get everything right, which is intense, but yeah, if you do not get failure to complete all 150 scored items, just means you won't be able to pass on to the next part. And the next part is the workplace-based assessment of clinical skills, which is very, very hard to be able to do. That would be essentially, rather than doing a clinical examination, which are also called OSCEs in Australia, but rather than doing clinical examination, so you do a year of practice and then you have your clinical examinations, you get to do it over the year, so you don't have a final exam. But I was reading about this, and it's very hard to get this. You would have to be coming from essentially places not like Poland, where your university degree is looked at a little bit more highly. It's like from places like America and England, where mostly England really, because they have a very similar system. This is actually adapted from the English system. So yeah, I mean, you can always try. and it does depend mostly on your grades as well. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of different kind of pathways, and it's really dependent on you, because yeah, there's just so many different, like, it's very nitty gritty, and it has to be specific for you. But essentially, here's another flow chart. So you have to do the clinical exam, receive your certificate. So first you do the multiple choice exam, and then afterwards you can secure an employment offer. Oh, sorry, I got it wrong. So first you have to do your clinical exam, then you can do your 12 months of supervised practice. So it's the other way around. You do your clinical exam before you do the, yeah. Otherwise, if you secure an employment offer beforehand, then it's what I was talking about, that you complete your 12 months practice and then do the clinical exam, or during those 12 months, you get to do your workplace-based assessment. However, securing an employment offer is not an easy feat. You obviously would have to do amazing on these tests, and you would have to have very, very good grades coming out of it. And it also sadly depends on your visa. So it depends what kind of a visa you can achieve. I'm not sure if visas is next. No, language requirements next. But your visa, if you're not a citizen or a permanent resident, you have less priority. Achieving citizenship in Australia is relatively difficult, but there are different kinds of visas that you can achieve, and they're kind of ranked differently. And different visas you achieve are based on a lot of different factors. And they're kind of based on your merit to be an Australian citizen, which, is that fair for immigrants? No. But I was reading a lot of different sources, and they just kind of were saying that you are at a disadvantage until you complete your 12-month supervised practice. Once you get through everything, all of the visas, all of this, and then you complete your 12-month supervised practice, once you do that and you pass all of that, then you are almost on equal footing as Australian and New Zealand graduates. So once you do get through that, it's okay. And it is possible. A lot of people do it. Most of the doctors that I know in Australia did not study in Australia. So that, I think, says a lot. I don't know where all the Australian doctors go, but not to Australia, apparently. So I don't know, if they all can do it, more people can. So I thought I'd quickly go over language requirements. If you're studying in English, that is enough. So as it says here. However, if you're not studying fully in English, there are some, I know, combined, I'm not sure if in Poland, but there are some combined English English degrees with a native language. So then that wouldn't be enough. However, if you did high school in a country where you were taught solely in English, and you did your whole tertiary, so your whole university studies in English, then that is enough. Otherwise, you have to, this is kind of the same thing. It's just essentially you have to do a lot. You have to study most of the time in English, or you do something called the IELTS. And the IELTS is from what I've heard, a hard English exam. I'm pretty sure most people would have heard about it. I think it's worldwide. But you have to score, I think they actually lowered what you need, which is nice, because that is nice. But you have to score a 7 overall, and a minimum score of 7 in each of the 4 components, which I'm actually not too sure, because I likely don't have to do the IELTS, but I'm pretty sure this isn't a very, this is doable. And I mean, if you can't do this, then it would be very difficult, because in Australia, there is no other language you can speak in. But yeah, so you need a 7. So if that's the route you take, then IELTS 7. Visas. So according to the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, the preferred temporary visa pathway for doctors is a temporary business long stay visa. And this is a little bit easier and than other visas, which is really, really nice. I think usually for a visa, you have to pay, again, between $300 and $1,000. And I didn't want to put the data in here, but usually it takes about 12 to 18 months. So a year to a year and a half to wait for a visa to work in Australia. So it's definitely something that I would recommend planning ahead. This visa is streamlined, so you may be able to do it quicker, but the thing is, after you finish university, you would have to finish university first to get it, so it might take a while. So I definitely recommend, if you are very interested in looking in Australia, look at the visas very early, 2 years in advance, and you'll probably need to apply about 1.5 to a year in advance at least. And not all visas get accepted. You have to, please, I really recommend reading every single sub point, every single little detail, because it is a lot of money to spend. Like 200 to 800 euro is a lot of money to spend, and not everyone gets accepted. Visas in Australia are not surefire, and it's one of the things that I would really just caution you on, because the other processes, you can pass all of this, you can get your English language requirements, you can do all of that, especially if you can study it, but the visas are just something that you can't study for, and it's kind of out of your hands. So just make sure you read the nitty-gritty and make sure you don't get disappointed, and you can apply again. You can apply many times for a visa. Obviously you have to pay each time, but it's not impossible. A lot of people get visas, but just make sure you do your research ahead of time. I'm not going to include it all because this would take a few hours, but yeah, just make sure you check. So now the more fun stuff. There are 64 recognized specialties for medicine in Australia. And while there are a lot of choices, it's actually made easier because of the division into basic and advanced training. So it's actually closer to the 16 options, well, 15 options because of the schools. So once you kind of choose a pathway, 15 options is not that bad. So yeah, and in at least Wrocław Medical University in the last year, you kind of choose your specialty, I think, or something similar to that. Yeah, hopefully. Or at least you hopefully have some sort of idea. So yeah, so I'll just go through it. So it's a bit blurry, but essentially it's very similar specializations to the rest of the world, as you can imagine. So once again, general practice, this is the one that has the shortest time from beginning to end. It's around 2 to 3 years, but this is just we call it a GP, a family doctor. So you go there, they are a primary healthcare professional, and they usually just send you off to other things. I'm sure you can imagine what that is. So there are a lot of very specific specializations, which is nice. And yeah, you can have a look. So there's, the normal OBGYN. There is also medical administration, which would be kind of like medical directors and things like that. But yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot to choose from and a lot of very specific ones. So I'm sure you can find exactly what you want to do, which is nice. There's a lot of surgeries and yeah. So I'm not going to go too much into PhDs because PhDs in Australia are nothing crazy. You need to get a visa, you need to apply to a university. That's it. I think it's pretty similar to the rest of the world. But yeah, this is a nice website. And yeah, so there's 400,000 international students doing a PhD in Australia currently, which is a lot. So it's very open. There's 43 universities, 12 Nobel Prizes. There's a lot of possibilities, and there is a lot of very good universities to do a PhD at. So if that's what you're more interested in, rather than going the clinical route, definitely a good place to do it. If you are happy to kind of pay 20 to 42,000 Australian dollars, because in Europe it is both free and you usually get paid for doing a PhD in some countries. So if you do want to go to Australia and do your PhD, you will have to, 18,000 would be very cheap. I'd say it usually falls around 30,000 Australian dollars, which is around 90,000 Polish zloty, which is a lot of money when you haven't got any money. And yeah, you have to pay up front essentially. So yeah, so I mean, that's kind of the only negative to that, but it's, you know, it's 3 years. And this is also, this is the fee per year. So yeah. Yeah, so it's quite a lot of money. This is for international students, but I'm assuming most of you are international, because if you're going to Australia, then you get something called HEX, which I'm not going to go into because that's a whole other thing, but we still have to pay. As Australian students, we still have to pay a lot of money, but we get debt instead. Yay. But wages. This is a nice thing. It pays more than Poland. Australia is an expensive country, so you have to take that into account. But as an intern, so these are the states in Australia. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with them. So to summarize the states, most of Australia is very empty. So we have 8 main cities that people live in. So the main ones you'd know in Victoria is Melbourne. In New South Wales is Sydney. In Australian Capital Territory is Canberra. Canberra's tiny. It would be very hard to find a place there, but you can try. In Queensland, you have Brisbane and the Gold Coast. And in South Australia, you have Adelaide. In Tasmania, you have Hobart. Northern Territory and Western Australia has a lot of places for rural students. And that is where you'd probably, usually in rural New South Wales, rural is outside of the cities. So imagine nothing. There you go. That's what and kangaroos. There's a lot of kangaroos and stuff. But you do have to usually do a year of practice there, which is sometimes challenging. Yeah, so the year of practice that you do have to do, I didn't mention that before, isn't in cities at all. It's outside of cities, because that's where there's the most need for doctors in Australia, which is why they accept international doctors, which it's an amazing experience, and the people in those communities need a lot of help. So you are doing a lot of good, but do take into account that you're not going to be living in Melbourne or Sydney. You're going to be living probably 5 to 10 hours away from the closest city. But if you do go fairly rural, so you can see in these states where there is less cities, you get paid quite a lot. So you get paid $80,000 a year as an intern. So like I said, the intern year is the first one until you get your board registration here. So then you get paid a little bit more, usually around 5,000 more, if my maths is correct, to 11,000 more. Wow, that's a lot. But yeah, and then senior resident only is in some medical colleges. Sometimes you jump straight from resident to registrar. So then obviously your fees go up a lot. And sometimes, not your fees, your wages. And if you're not a registrar, sometimes you don't get a senior registrar position. Sometimes you just continue being a registrar until you get your specialization. But then you do get paid a little bit more every year, just not quite as much as this. So one thing I'd like to add is the hours that you work as an intern is a lot. It's like, I think in most countries, to be honest, this isn't special for Australia. You have to work huge weeks. Like, if I don't want to say the wrong thing, because I've kind of forgotten off the top of my head, but I think you have to do a lot of extra hours. You have to work most weekends. And I think per month it comes out to around 300 hours, which is a lot. That's 80-hour weeks, which is a lot. And usually it's a little bit more. So you do work a lot and you don't get a lot of overtime pay. It's kind of like a little bit less than you normally would, but you do get it, which is really nice. So if you work weekends, if you work public holidays, you usually get 1.5 to 2 times the amount you would get during a weekday, or if you work at night, which when you start working here, if you pick up like night shifts or weekend shifts, your pay gets doubled. So if you're earning around $80 an hour, you earn $160 an hour, which is amazing. With overtime in Australia, wages are really, really good. And that is a huge bonus that I know you don't get as much in some other countries. But yeah, as an intern, you do get used and abused. Like you do in most countries, and nothing crazy about it, but full disclosure. But now wages when you're a specialist, this is a pretty good breakdown. So the senior salary is in red and the average salary is in blue. So as you can see, you earn a decent amount. Life in Australia is very expensive, so it's nothing crazy, but you can definitely progress. If you work in private practice, you obviously make so much more, but this is for public. So the senior salary, as you can see, let me just move. Okay. If you're a neurological surgeon or a cardiothoracic surgeon, you are going to be making a lot of money. Simply put, around 600,000 Australian dollars a year. So all Australian wages are calculated in years. They're not calculated monthly or weekly like they are in Poland, at least, and in a lot of European countries. So this is all just per year. This is how you get. And you also have to give some of this money to taxes, and you have to give some of this money to a super fund. And your super fund is essentially kind of like your retirement fund in other countries. However, it's quite interesting in Australia. It works like stocks. So you're essentially investing in stocks, but you don't get a choice. They invest your money, and so it goes up and down. So if, for example, you put in 50,000 Australian dollars over the course of however many years, you will either end up with more or less than your 50,000. You can end up with less if you're unlucky, but you can also end up with more. You can end up with like 80,000 if the stocks go well, which is super random. I was thinking about it last year, and it was super random. When Corona happened, my parents' superannuation just went whoop, but then they went back up, so it's okay. But yeah, it was a bit of it's a very interesting thing, to be honest. Do I have anything more? No, so there are the resources. What else would I like to say just quickly? Australia is a beautiful place to live. It is an amazing, amazing country. I'm very, very lucky to call it my home. Like every place, it has its upsides and its downsides. It's not the easiest country to work in. You have to jump through a lot of loopholes, but if you really want it, it's going to be worth it in the long run. And working in rural Australia, it would be an amazing experience as well. And it does help communities. And Australia does have a shortage of doctors as well. So, they do really rely on international doctors, and there are a lot of spots and a lot of need for international doctors to come in. Honestly, it's hard to say if I would recommend it because I haven't worked as a doctor in Australia, but I have spoken to many of them, and it obviously depends if you work in the public or the private sector. The public sector has its downsides, like any other country. You are sometimes overworked and underpaid for what you do, but there are also a lot of benefits that you don't get in a lot of other countries. Some of my friends have parents who are doctors, and some of them they work in the public sector, but they just go to cruises to Antarctica once a year. It's kind of cool. And they there is a lot of opportunities, and Australian doctors they are world renowned, a lot of them. And so you do get a lot of opportunities in a lot of different countries, which is awesome. It is an expensive place to live. And there are some downsides to the healthcare system and to the education system, which, like every country, honestly, there are downsides like every country, which shouldn't dissuade you if it's what you want to do. But there is just, there's a lot of good in it. And I don't know, if you're interested in it, look at some more resources. There is pages and pages to read. The AMC is probably the easiest place to start. If you look up on Google, if you won't have access to these links, if you look up on Google, international medical graduate working in Australia, it will send you to these links. So the medical board is will tell you kind of everything you need to know. Also, I found a link called advancedmed.com.au, and this kind of has a really nice breakdown in layman terms. So it's just like, it's not the government websites that are kind of confusing. It's just somebody who kind of compiled the information already, and you can kind of access it in a more legible manner. So this is really nice. This is if you want to look up if your school is accredited in Australia, and this is for PhDs. So if you do want to do further reading, because I could talk for hours about this, but this is, I think, a good overview, then make sure to check out these resources, because they will for sure help, and they're not too complicated. So yeah, hopefully they help. If there's any questions, I might just...
Yes, we have one question. Are you getting paid for doing the part of your residency in Australia, or do you have to pay?
Like I said here, you actually do get paid. This is how much you get paid for your year of residency, the intern column. So you get paid a lot. You get paid approximately $1,000 a year, minus obviously taxes and everything, but you can figure that out yourself.
Yeah, so I don't know if we have more questions.
Yes, I think I have some privately. So
nice.
Would you say it's IELTS necessary, or is Cambridge Certificate of Proficiency? I'd say IELTS. I'd say that IELTS is necessary. As you saw here, these were the only options. And yeah. So these are the only options, and there are no other exams that they accept. So yeah. Also, what does it say? Just out of curiosity, have you found the Australian accent difficult to understand at the beginning? When I was a small baby, I didn't understand any English. I grew up in Australia. Honestly, nobody understands me, so I hope you guys understood. But it's a difficult accent, but I'm sure you can learn to understand it like any other, and then you can speak a little bit funny like the rest of us. Let's see what else to say. Where can I find out, or who can I ask about postgraduate career in dentistry in Australia? Look at the resources I sent. They also have everything about dentistry in Australia. So the medicine umbrella in Australia, medicine and dentistry. So these pathways will also apply to you, some of them. Would you say it's easy to become a doctor when you already have a specialization? 100%. If you are specialized, all you need to do is get your specialization accredited, and then you can, as long as you have a job position, you just go to Australia. And if you're specialized, you just immediately start getting paid as long as you get it accredited. Honestly, from most countries you will. And Australia needs specialists. They are definitely more willing to accept specialists than they are. And most Australian doctors that I know and that I've spoken to maybe 20 or 30, and I've spoken to professors. Most of them did their studies in Australia, specialization out of Australia, then came back to work. So I definitely think it's easier to do that. That's probably a better pathway. Okay, can you elaborate a bit on that 150 out of 150 correct answer stuff? It sounds quite scary. You have to get them all right. You have to get 100%. I don't know, but I'd say you have to get 150 multiple choice questions correct. But that being said, I'm pretty sure that most of them would be pretty general. So you have to have general knowledge about all of these. Am I still sharing my screen? I am. So you would have to, adult health, surgery, you have to have a good knowledge about all of these. I am 100% sure that there are a lot of learning resources. Australia loves to sell learning resources, so I'm sure you can buy past questions, you can buy learning resources. So I'm sure there's a lot more to find out on the internet, and it is a multiple choice exam. So, you just have to, you have a 20% chance of getting them all right or something like that. I'm pretty bad at maths, but I don't think that's right. I said that to someone once and they laughed at me, so maybe not. But you do have to, like it says here, you have to complete all 150 items. But actually, I'm not sure if this says you have to complete. So maybe you just have to answer them all, hopefully. But you would probably have to score very, very high.
But it would be pretty retarded to say failure to complete. Like,
But it's because it's timed. Some
oh
people
yeah.
have a amount of time. But yeah, so if you have to answer all 100. Okay, maybe I scared you guys for no reason. Okay, that would be really nice if I did. But you definitely have to complete all 150 answers, and you have to score very high. So maybe if you score like 100%, then you can immediately get an employment offer. Yeah. So yeah, so don't be scared. I'm pretty sure it's doable. Everything's doable if you just do it. But yeah, I don't see any other questions.
If you have questions, you can ask them now.
Yeah.
Failure to complete 150 items.
Yeah.
That's actually.
But yeah, I totally read that wrong. That's my bad. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, but like, you know, in that moment, I would be translating, just like copy and pasting and translating and just like checking if I actually understood it correctly.
Yeah, but it says like failure to complete. It also kind of sounds like you need to get them all right, but I think it's just weird wording.
Yeah, most probably, you know,
Come on.
maybe it's the Australian accent, you know.
It's the Australian accent. It's on the website, just making it a bit difficult for us to understand. But yeah, okay. Can you continue in Australia's specialty, which you started in Poland? So that is the option, the short-term practice option. So this is the specialist pathway, short-term training. So specialist in training, you can. I'm not going to give you details from it now because I'd have to go into it all again, but yes is the answer. Hopefully, if you can get accredited for what you did, but it should be yes.
Is there any type
of organization to help young doctors relocate to Australia? I'd start by looking at this website. It depends from what country. If you're from England, yes, heaps. This advanced med website, I'd recommend looking at that because it has a lot for international medical graduates. There are, I'm sure, a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different organizations that would help. I can't name any at the moment though. There was a question about if there was a pathway for people who have already passed USMLE. Yes. I actually didn't include the information itself about the USMLE here, but I'm pretty sure I saw it. I'm very sure I read about it somewhere. I think it would be the pathway with not the specialist pathway. It will be the competent authority pathway. This one. Would you recommend applying for intern in Australia after med school in Poland and then doing specialty in Poland or Europe? Well, the only thing that you would benefit from doing your internship in Australia, I'm not actually sure if you could do that, but if you do your internship in Australia, you get paid, which is nice, but you have to pass very difficult exams and you have to pay. You wouldn't actually make any money from it because the living costs and your visas and your flights would about equal 80,000 for the year. So, and plus the test, you have to pay for every exam, you have to pay for your applications. So that's already just all of that would already be around $10,000 because that's just how much it adds up to. And accommodation, you usually pay around 200 Australian dollars a week for a very small apartment, which is around 600 times 4, 2,400. So you pay, around 2,500 to 3,000 zloty a month for a room, which is like a little bit more, quite a bit more than in Australia because the rooms are not, like that's very, very cheap. Usually you would be paying between 500 and 700 in a city. So it would, it would get eaten up very quickly, the money you make. How does the tax system work in Australia? How much of the salary you've presented is taxed? Well, it is, I should remember this, I got taxed last year. It's brackets, like everywhere else. The more you earn, the more you pay. When you're earning over 100,000, what's the password here? I'll look it up quickly and then I'll be able to translate it. It's, yep. Give me one moment. I will actually just check that because it's not very complicated, but I know it takes a little bit of time to figure it out. So essentially there's tax brackets and okay, so when you're earning between 6,000 to 35,000, you have to pay 15% tax. When you're earning between 35 to 80,000, you get taxed 30%. So you'd be getting taxed 30% essentially. And then if you get 80 to 180,000, it's 38%. And then over 180,000, it's 45%. However, you're only getting taxed on the money so the brackets work like this. Between 1 and 6,000, you don't pay any taxes. So then if you're earning 15,000, you only get taxed between 6 and 15,000, if that makes sense. And then if you earn 35,000, you only get taxed 30% from the 35 to 80,000. So you don't get taxed 30 for the whole amount, you get taxed for the amount above the last bracket, which it sounds a bit complicated, but it's not as complicated as it sounds. But you'd be getting taxed around, so if you're earning around, in 2014, you'd be, okay, so if you earn between 37 and 90,000, you have to pay $3,000 of tax plus 32 cents for each dollar over 37,000, if that makes it a bit more clear. Just math stuff. However, in Australia, there's a website called the ATO, and you don't have to do your taxes. You just put in how much you earn, and they do it for you. So it's really nice. No maths. And I don't have any other questions. If anybody else has one, you can send it now.
Yeah, if there are no more questions, then I think we can finish. If you have some more questions or anything is unsure, you can text me on my Instagram because I'm usually replying there, and then I can forward the questions to Helena.
Yep. And
so yeah, if you
later on down the road.
Yeah, and the recording is most probably going to be posted this week, but I need to survive university somehow, so let's go. Yeah.
But yes.
Okay. So for now, thank you, Helena, for doing this presentation. I hope, like, for me, it was very interesting and I understand it more or less right now.
Yeah.
I hope that someone is gonna get inspired and actually is gonna run away.
Do it.
Keep us updated on your runaway journey. Yeah.
If you do have any more questions, feel free to contact Wiktoria. She can pass my contact info along, and I'm happy to help.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you all for coming, and I would say see you on the next webinar, but actually this one is the last one. So maybe see you next academic year.
Yeah, hopefully for more countries.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
I don't know. It never